hammer. I stopped the car to look. It was most certainly a hammer, and not 3 feet away from it was my barely smoked cigarette. I don't drive down this road anymore. I can't bear the thought of what might have happened if we sat pulled over on the side of the road for any longer. The police said they would continue their investigation, but I don't think they'll do shit. Somewhere in the woods of Whitewood Road there's a man that has no reason being there, and to be honest I never want to know what he was doing. The whole story is true. You can believe me if you want, you can say this is just made up, say I'm trolling, whatever. I don't care. But I promise. The image of that man, him as I've come to refer to him, grinning at me will be burned into my mind for the rest of my life. Things in my life have been pretty crazy in my life recently, /x/, and I thought I might share since I've heard stories from here. I don't really expect anyone here to believe me, and that's fine. This is intended to be mainly therapeutic to me. I want to tell at least someone what's happening to me. I lived near an old patch of woods in North America when I was about 12. When I say old, I mean primordial old. Shit lives in there that you never knew existed. I lived in a little town, at the end of a dead-end lane, before people started moving in and making changes to the town. I had 3 friends that I always hung out with over vacations, and during the summer, we didn't all go to the same school, but we lived in the same town. Taylor, Josh, Pepper, and me. The woods were kind of ours, nobody went, or goes, into the woods. There are no roads that went through them, and it was just better to avoid them unless you were really young, stupid, or high. Sometimes, a neighboring farmer's animal would get lost in the woods, and though attempts would be made to find it, rarely any animals were ever found. If they were, they usually died of shock shortly thereafter. I can detail the sorts of things we found in the woods, but that might be for later. The shit we found was pretty awesome. But in the summer of '98, something happened that I can't really remember. Pep, Taylor, Josh, and I went into the woods, and apparently were kidnapped. We spent nearly 48 hours in there, but I can hardly remember anything. Here's what I can remember. At around 5 o'clock in the evening in August, we all met at the end of the lane where we usually did before we headed off to play. Because it was before the time of reliable contact with parents, my mom gave me her watch and told me to remember to be back in by 7. We were all a little nervous, because people were saying a prowler was living in the woods, and they'd seen him around town, and we were pretty certain we'd seen him, too, though I don't remember actually seeing him. I remember running into the woods behind Pep and Taylor. Josh was fastest, and he was already over the fence and into the woods. We must have gone to the fort we found. It was probably the remnants of an old house, but it was pretty unrecognizable to us. I remember hearing something crashing in the woods, and Josh asking if we heard it, too. I remember telling Pepper she should stay put, and we would go check it out. After that, I don't remember anything. After 48 hours, and our parents and people in the town launching a search for us, they found me in a place they'd already looked. I was backed up into a large oak tree, standing alone in a clearing in the woods. I wasn't wearing shoes, and there were long, bloody gashes on my back and legs. A hunter found one of Pep's barrettes some years later buried under pine needles. He said he'd only seen it because he'd been up in his stand, and he had seen a glint below him. Some college kids found an old cache of our stuff that we must have left in a kind of burrow. It really troubles me that I can't remember more of what happened, and the stuff that I do remember the therapists told me are probably false memories. I want to share some of these with you, if anyone is interested. Tell me more up. I am very interested in hearing. Alrighty. I remember the Willow Man. He was tall, thin, and had a laugh like thunder. I remember seeing him in the trees, moving so fast we could hardly see him. The day we disappeared, we didn't see him at all, but other days we would see him mostly in the summer. I always wondered why. Maybe because he was harder to spot in the foliage. You could always tell he was there, though, because he moved differently from the rest of the trees. We tried telling our parents about him. Mine were alarmed at the thought of a strange person in the woods. Pep's parents, who were very Christian, thought he was either a devil or B, someone trying to scare us. Josh didn't bother telling his folks. He liked to pretend he was more adult than the rest of us, and Taylor only had a mom who was usually out working one of her 3 jobs. Some people believed about the Willow Man, though. Some people even knew he was there. If we saw him, we didn't stick around, though. He never seemed to do anything except stand, watching you, about 30 or so feet away, swaying like a tree. To be honest, that summer we were a little obsessed with the Willow Man. We always knew he was there, but I remember Josh making it his life's mission to find the Willow Man that summer. The rest of us regarded the Willow Man the way you would usually think about a monster in your closet. You were pretty sure he was there, but you didn't have any real proof, except that you were scared as hell. So the summer began with us looking for places the Willow Man would be. This turned out to be pretty stupid. We automatically assumed he would be in dangerous, hard to access, or creepy places. In the woods, there were frequently old, abandoned buildings. Another town used to be next to ours about 200 years ago, and had been since subsumed by the woods. What happened to the people in the next town, and why didn't it exist anymore? They probably all moved out into other surrounding towns, but we like to think that the Willow Man had gotten them. You could still find old cobblestone paths peppered throughout the woods, and if you followed them, you could trace the outlines of the old towns. We decided that the town's graveyard and what we decided was a cheese factory were the most likely places for the Willow Man to be. I think we quickly decided the graveyard was a wash. I remember going there one evening, and finding a few graves in the dozen or so that were there were empty. While unsettling and creepy, Taylor, Pep, and I didn't take it to be obvious evidence of the Willow Man's movements, but Josh thought otherwise. He was sure it was the Willow Man's work. He had either dug their bodies back up, or these were graves where the people were dead, but no one ever found their bodies. I remember spending a few weeks of sleepless nights, waking up and looking into the woods after that, to make sure the Willow Man hadn't followed me home. The cheese factory was a little different. I can't remember what happened there very well, either, but I remember running, and falling out of the woods with Pep and Taylor. I remember we thought we had lost Josh in the factory, but he showed up cranky and pissed that we had left him when we had stopped to hop across the town's old cistern. I don't remember any of this happening, but I know whoever we had seen in the cheese factory hadn't been Josh. Is there anyone listening? I feel so empty talking to silence. The old town was generally where we spent the first few weeks looking for the Willow Man. There honestly wasn't that much to explore, since it was all run down and before the advent of electricity. There was also a sort of watchtower made of wood somewhere in the center of the woods. While you might think that we were trespassing, this thing was as old as dirt, hewn from whole trees by probably axes, and held together by old, rusty metal nails. It was the most curious construction. Josh decided around the end of May that it was originally built by the old townsfolk to keep a lookout for the Willow Man, and decided in keeping of our forefathers' traditions, we should use it to do the same. We planned to have a sleepover in it, in fact. I remember lying straight-faced to my parents about sleeping over at Josh's. We all did, in fact, except Josh. We all snuck into the woods at around 5, and climbed up the watchtower. It was close enough to the village that I could see the town fire hall, right at the edge of the woods. The watchtower wasn't that tall, maybe 15 feet or so, and it had a great ladder that we discovered could be pulled up through a lever system. We didn't manage to spend the whole night. At around 8, we started hearing this aggravated breathing and crashing through the undergrowth, and then this long moaning. It could have just been someone who was high or drunk, but we spent about another hour sweating out the noises before we got too scared and booked it out of the woods. It didn't seem like anything pursued us, but when we went back to the tower the next day, the crackers, fruit snacks, and soda we had brought had been torn through and strewn around the clearing. That part right there scared me more than anything else in the whole ordeal. Sorry guys, something weird is going on when I try to post. Every fucking time, something happens, so it takes me a few minutes. I think it might be worth telling you that the woods don't belong to anyone. I think it's a state park now, or something, or a preserve, or something like that. In any case, no one can use it for foresting, except for growth management every once in like 5 years or something. As a side note, after the kidnapping, my family moved away from the town for about a decade. We didn't sell the house or anything, we lived with my mom's parents in the next town over for a while, before moving out to Seattle for a few years. When I was about 18, we moved back into our old home. I didn't, and still don't remember what happened, so going back home didn't feel that traumatic for me. I felt like Pep, Josh, and Taylor were still here. I still do feel that way, to a certain extent. I just don't know where they are, or what happened to them. Your feeling of them still being there is probably due to you not being there to let it sink in that they're gone, and the sudden return of all the old feelings of the town brought that one too. Does anyone have any idea what this thing might be? Anyone heard similar stories or know of any myths? I'm interested now. You're probably right, it still doesn't feel real. I keep expecting them to just show up. In any case, after the watchtower, we found something like a burrow farther into the woods. There were 3 rocks, 2 propped up, and 1 on top, leading down to a hole in the ground. At first we were distracted, thinking it was an animal's den or something, but after shining flashlights, tossing in noisemakers, and finally crawling in, we discovered it was actually a deserted cave. There was a rank, rotten smell there, more human than animal. It's weird that I remember it to this day, or maybe I only remember remembering. There were things around the burrow that made you almost think a person lived there. There was a little hole where water dripped down from the ceiling, and made a kind of water dish. In the corner, there were old magazines and the ends of gnawed bones. We were puzzled as to what to think of it. We figured it was probably some hobos, or a college kids. But then Josh decided this was where the Willow Man took the people he stole, and kept them here, before they disappeared forever. Taylor chipped in, figured he ate them, but we all knew that wasn't true. The Willow Man didn't eat people, that was just stupid. It took a few days to sufficiently stake out the burrow. In fact, it took about 2 weeks before we moved on from it, figuring it to be a bust. Nothing ever happened while we were there, so we figured it was safe enough to use for ourselves, and we decided to keep different Willow Man hunting odds and ends there. At one point, we ended up stashing a whole Coleman tent in there, but it ended up getting shredded to hell in the end of July, which was when we decided to stop using the burrow. Besides, we were pretty sure someone else was trying to use it, too. When we would visit the burrow, sometimes our stuff would have been gone through, or sometimes missing. Occasionally there would be drag marks outside the opening of the cave, which creeped us out more than anything. I'm going to step out for a while guys, I've got some things to do, and I